Good seeing everybody. Welcome back. It's warm out there.
Yeah, look at all these bare legs in here. Good grief. Y'all need to get some sun on those things, or I'm going to have to wear some sunglasses up front here. Okay, we're getting a good glare. Got to start early. Is that what it is? Hey.
Because it gets too much shade.
Hey, I'm proud of you. If these are in shorts, no. Everybody wants to know, was that man riding a chicken? That's kind of what happens when you see me in shorts. It's not that.
The only one who would notice would be you.
I wish that were true. Well, we're continuing in our study, and specifically narrowing down. We're going to kind of step back and look at the image of God just a little bit more in detail tonight. And then I want to play this video. I mentioned this morning, not just as clickbait. It wasn't just something to bait people to get here. But I very seriously want you to hear. Her name is Austin Hartke. And she is, okay, so when you see her, she is as a man, okay? So when you see her, that's going to be how she presents herself. But I want you to, just before I forget, she has books published by Westminster John Knox Press. She went to Luther Rice Seminary, Master of Arts program, Old Testament Hebrew Studies, which is a relatively conservative school, by the way. It's not exactly, but what I'm saying is her training, her background is in Hebrew, in theology, in Old Testament and things. And so she's got several anthologies. Basically, her big book is called Transforming the Bible and the Lives of Transgender Christians. So you're going to get to hear from her and specifically get to hear how she deals with Genesis chapter 1 on topic. So I think it's good. Sometimes we don't know what you're going to hear when you hear somebody who's in that walk of life. What would they say? What would they comment? How do they figure this out in their heads? Well, after tonight, you'll know a little bit more. I'm not promising that it's going to be complete because to my plan, she comments on Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2 separately. So it helped me out because, we're trying to stay in Genesis chapter 1, not looking at Genesis chapter 2 quite yet, to try to keep our minds going. So we are back at Genesis chapter 1. We're picking back up. Let's read the text again. Let me make it worse for you. Let me show you a cross-comparative text of all the different translations, since we talked about this last week. Which one of them's right? Okay. So this is not one, there's a ton of things that are differences. So again, just for everybody's knowledge, NIV, both forms of NIV are thought-for-thought translations. ESV, CSB is kind of a hybrid of thought-for-thought and word-for-word. That's Christian Standard Bible. NAS is word-for-word, and New King James is word-for-word. So that's where you're going to get a little bit different. So this is...
ESV, sorry.
It's word-for-word.
That's what
It's sometimes when you hear the NIV will be called, sometimes you'll hear it described as a dynamic equivalent instead of a word-for-word.
What I like about the NAS and the NKJV is that they capitalize he. They capitalize he.
Yeah, some do and some don't. It's interesting. Depends on what study Bible you get too. These are specifically taken out of my Bible study software. So whatever was put in the Bible study software comes out. So you can follow along in whatever translation you have. So we're picking up at, make sure, all right, make sure we're in the right place. We're picking up verse 27. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. we've got the same basic idea going across the different translations. The important parts that we're trying to get here, that we're trying to understand, is being created in the image of God is not a masculine or a feminine. It is a both and. Both men and women are created in the image of God. Sometimes when we start getting into Genesis chapter 2, we'll start talking about God's creative order and how things apply even to the economy in the home and what he does with leadership and church and things like that. And that's all wrapped up in the creative order. But as an individual, every man, every woman is created in the image of God. The first man and woman, and from then on, we've all borne that image. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." Now, we've talked a little bit about last week about sometimes living creatures, beasts, creatures that crawl. There's different broad stroke categories that are covered. At the end of the day, we're talking about the animal kingdom broad. Okay, everything that is an animal, fish included in that, is part of what God has called mankind to subdue, to rule over those creatures. One of the things, I was reading an article just this week, this line right here, fill the earth, they said God surely couldn't have meant that, because if God would have let people just procreate and procreate, we would have overfilled the earth by now. I'm like, that makes no sense, because God has a plan for everything. So why are we worried about it? And we're not even close to overpopulating the world, by the way. We just hear that all the time because it's a good talking point. Now, there are certain places that you go in the world that are much more populated than others. But, all right, let's keep going. Then God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed. It shall be food for you." Again, we talked about this, but let's just re-emphasize it back. Vegetarians at this point. Okay? There's no meat-eating animals until after the flood. Prior to this, and some people get all hung up on the fact, but the tiger kind, they have big sharp claws and they have big sharp teeth because they were all, but there's people that have some pretty sharp teeth that all they do is eat lettuce. There's some animals out there that's what they do, so that's a misnomer as well. "And to every beast of the earth, and every bird of the sky, and everything that moves on the earth, which has life, I have given every green plant for food," and it was so. So again, we're getting that idea. God said it, it was so. God said it, it was so. God's setting the boxes, God's setting the parameters, and it happens accordingly. God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was, for the first time, very good. And there was evening, there was morning, the sixth day. So that's textually, you want to have some fun? Here's a different translation. "So God created man and woman and shaped them with his image inside them. In his own beautiful image, he created his masterpiece. Yes, male and female, he created them. And God blessed them in his love, saying, 'Reproduce and be fruitful, populate the earth and subdue it. Reign over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and every creature that lives on the earth.' And God said, 'I give you every seed-bearing plant growing throughout the earth, vegetables and every fruit-bearing tree with its seed within itself. They will be for your food. They will also be food for every animal and bird and every creature that moves on the ground, every creature with a breath of life.' And so it happened. And God surveyed all that he had made and said, 'I love it. For it pleased him greatly.' Evening gave way to morning, day 6. Nope, not message. I think it's New Living Translation. I tried to find another one for you. I tried to find the Passion, which is a horrible translation, but I couldn't find one for you to put up on the screen. So when we start talking about this, we're starting to talk a little bit more in detail about this idea of image of God. Vladimir Lossky has this overview called the Imago Dei in the Church Fathers. So who are the early Church Fathers? Let's remind ourselves again. Who are they?
They're the first generation after the apostles.
Yeah, they're the first generation after the apostles. So the apostles, and then they were the next generation of pastors. And he did a study of all the different teaching from that next generation. It reveals all kinds of things. One of the things he said, he sees that God is understood through man's dominion over the natural world. It is sought in the sovereign dignity of man and his lordship over the terrestrial world. Other times it's seen in particular aspects of our being, his spiritual nature and the soul or principle or the ruling part of his being, or in his mind, or in the higher faculties such as intellect or reason, or in freedom proper to man, or inner determination by which man has true author of his own actions. The focus sometimes regards specific qualities of the soul, simplicity or its immortality, or it's described as the ability to know God or living in communion with God, the possibility of sharing the indwelling of the Holy Spirit in the soul. So what we're saying is the early church fathers started to flesh out this idea of what did it mean to be created in the image of God. And it really was all over the place, spectrum-wise, of different areas. In each case, the early church fathers are grappling with what we tried to grapple with, which is the inadequacy of human language to convey what is the central element of being created in the image of God. We talked about image, we talked about likeness, and so I found a few things here to kind of help you understand how some people look at this. These are different parts of mankind that are talking about ways that people are trying to understand what does it mean to be created in the image of God. Man is a spiritual being. God is spirit, those who worship him. Man is personal. God is also personal. Man is volitional, big word, makes choices, okay? Makes his own choices. Relational. Mankind is designed for relationship from the very beginning. In Genesis chapter 2, we're going to find out why woman came along. It's not good that man be alone. We don't know that yet, but just in case I want to give you a spoiler. The immortalness of humanity. Animals are not immortal. I'm sorry. I know your cats are planning on being there, but they're not immortal beings. If they're going, never mind, I'm not even going to say it. I'm not even going to say it and get myself in trouble. And the power of man, which is the ability side of man. All of these are different ways. Another person separates it this way. That should say mentally, not mentally. Mentally, morally, and socially, three parts of our being that we relate to the image of God. We have a capability of understanding, a consciousness. The moralness, some people call it common morality. Why is there morality in the world if people don't believe in God? Well, it's part of being created in the image of God. There's a certain element of morality that is written upon the heart of man. Now, it's still chosen to whether to act on that innate understanding or to not act on it. And again, the social aspect of mankind. From the very beginning, when God put man upon the earth, he talked to him. And there was a relational aspect to it. Socialness is part of our being. Now, some of you are better at it than others. Some of you are introverts, and you'd be just fine if nobody talked to you the whole time you were at church. You already used up your 5 words for the day when you got in the car. The rest of you are on word 5,000, and you're still about half full. You're waiting on the rest of the words to fill you up. But regardless of how many words you need, we are created socially to be engaging with one another. One more separation, authority. The fact that mankind can grapple with authority, that we are created. Later, the psalmist will say we're created a little lower than the angels. So even in that, we're in the creation narrative. What are we given? We are given authority over the earth with instructions. Value. There is a value placed upon mankind simply because you're created in the image of God. We talk about this particularly at Sanctity of Human Life type times of year. Every single baby that is ever conceived is conceived in the image of God and has value from that moment of conception, period. And that's part of the Imago Dei. Gender is wrapped up in our imagery. And you're going to find out why that plays out as we keep going. Male and female, whether you're XX or XY, we can change a lot about you, but we've not figured out how to change that DNA, those chromosomes. Now, there are variants. We used to call them abnormalities. We used to call them, back when language was a little more crass, deformities. I have a cousin who is a hermaphrodite, and so they're possessing two genders in one body, but they are, she lives as a woman but has other traits that are very masculine. She has a birth defect. Doesn't change that there's a specific gender identity. Gender is not fluid just because of deformity.
No, just curious, do like both sets of organs work, or like, are they both fully developed?
No.
Okay, that's what I.
It is a deformity, and most, if not all, are sterile. I know
I mean,
my cousin
I've heard
is.
of XYs looking like a woman because it's what do you call that? An intersex.
Well, that's the new term, an intersex. We didn't have that term when we were all younger growing up.
But they're XYs, but they're born that way. They look like a woman because of the mothers, whatever.
Right.
All this. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's.
But it's like anything else. We don't want to take any kind of variant and create a new thing out of it.
And make a rule.
I mean, we can't create a rule out of any kind of variant.
Right.
I mean, okay, so when a calf has 4 legs, do we have a different kind of calf now? Well, what if it has 5 legs?
Right.
Is it a different kind of calf than the calf that has 4 legs? Or is it a birth defect? But see, the culture we live in wants to create more out of it.
Right.
Something like this, but I've seen two parents say things like this. We're probably twins that did never completely form to what I.
Yeah, there are situations as that, yeah. It's crazy. But we live in a culture that says, take the deformity and label it. Label it as something new and distinct. And yeah, evolution is the important factor. They need those deformities to be evolutionary links in order for it to make sense for the overall understanding. Personhood, morality, we've talked about. Creativity. Mankind is innately creative in different ways. Just leave your toddler alone for a few hours and find out whether or not they're creative. They will surprise you. Give them a box of crayons and walk out of the room with no instructions and no paper. The capability to love is part of carrying over. So these are just different ways that down through history, theologians have tried to lay out different ways of being created in the image of God. What does that mean? Well, it means a ton of things, and we talked about that a lot last week. I just wanted to let you see it in a format that was a little different than what we've been looking at, being graphically. So, if we are to go with a summary, in God's perfect creative design, He created everyone as male or female. There's a summary statement, okay? In God's perfect creative design, He created everyone as male or female. So as we continue looking through here, Genesis 1:27, so God created man in the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. There's 12 words in Hebrew. They're in 3 lines, and they kind of have a cadence to them in Hebrew that gets lost. It's not a poem. That's one of the arguments that some people try to do, that try to expel that Genesis is not a historical delineation of the creative order. It's just a poem. It's just poetry. Well, poetry can be factual too, but it doesn't follow a poetry narrative all the way through. But there is a cadence here, and it's used to accentuate something carefully chosen, to re-emphasize specific words. If you will, it's kind of almost like superlative language of how men and women are created in his image. It's just trying to really can you hear it? Do you got it? Do you understand this? You are created, male and female. The connective tissue takes us back. I don't want her to talk yet. The connective tissue takes us back to verse 26, where we have that word created, created, created. So, just taking for a minute, male and female, he created them. In Hebrew, it reads kind of like, as male and female created he them. Same thing, it just lays out a little bit different. Males and females equal but not identical. There is a distinct biological sex. It is separate, it is distinct, designed by God. God created males and females on purpose, and as we'll find out in Genesis chapter 2, with specific purposes. Now, mankind, man and woman, shares in the equal dominion over the animals, dominion over the earth. That's a shared responsibility at that point. But our different designs and distinct capabilities will, when the roles are lined out in chapter 2, it will make more sense. There are basically 3 primary characteristics. We have different reproductive organs, different external anatomy, and either the presence or absence of a Y chromosome. So that's the basic distinction between male and female. We have different reproductive organs, different external anatomy, and the presence or absence of a Y chromosome. Gender is designed by, if you will, the grand designer at conception. It's part of what God does. It is created by God from our DNA all the way through. God is the giver of gender. Males and females do not have interchangeable anatomy. The differences are not inconsequential. The scripture makes that clear, but so does biology. Biology makes it pretty clear that is also. Bethlehem Baptist Church, which is, for some of you, John Piper. Some of you know John Piper. They have a statement that they're using in their documents now, and it reads this: "We affirm that when God created human beings, he established a male-female binary that is normatively displayed at the chromosomal level of human biology. These biological markers cannot be legitimately chosen or changed based on personal preference, subjective feeling, or societal norm." Seems pretty succinct. Let me read it again, but because it's a little long, but wrap your brain through it. The church is saying together, as part of their covenant, that they affirm that when God created human beings, he established a male-female binary that is normatively displayed at the chromosome level of human biology. That's allowing for abnormalities. That's allowing for defects. That's allowing for those biological markers cannot be legitimately chosen. That doesn't happen. You can have gender selective abortion, but you are just killing the gender you don't want. You're not changing the gender of what you do have. You can't change that biology based on personal preference, what somebody wants, or subjective feeling, how I am feeling, or what others make me feel like, or being squished into some societal norm.
I was just gonna comment, it's interesting because of things that we've known since creation. Now we some people question, so now we have to be very specific about exactly what we understand the Bible to actually say. So we have to spell it out, things that were taken for granted or understood, without much explanation previously.
It's really sad, but there have been court cases. I know of a church in Zeeland, Michigan. They had to change their doctrinal statement so that members of their church, their definition of marriage was a biological male married to a biological female. When they did that, they had protesters and everything outside the church but why did they do that? Lawsuit pending because they were being discriminated against because they weren't a biological male and biological female. It was
I mean, you're using like redundant terms like.
It does feel
biological.
very redundant to us. And this kind of takes me a little bit back to this morning, okay? And we've got to be really careful. When we enter into this subject, it's very easy for us to say, this is a no-brainer. Why are we talking about this? But this is very important to these people who are involved in it. It's important enough that they will spend thousands and thousands of dollars, that they will go through several hoops to attempt to gain an understanding of themselves. And it's not, there are those that just kind of are playing around with it, okay? We know that. But there are people that this is something very legitimate for them. And so when we interact with them, we've got to learn to interact with them on a legitimate basis. We have to hear them, understand, that's part of what we're going to talk about now. How do we begin to understand? Because one of the things that I don't know that we all really understand is, what's the terminology anyway? I'll throw some terminology at you later tonight, and I didn't know all of them. I thought I was doing pretty good, and whoop, didn't know that one. I ran across this is kind of the things that sometimes, this is from a sermon somebody preached. Can you imagine if Adam said to God, I know you made me a male, but I feel like I'm a woman, so I was wondering if you could change the anatomy that you created me with. Now, that sounds fine to us. But if you're somebody who's sitting in a certain church at a certain time who's struggling with your gender identity and you're feeling made fun of, how willing are you going to be willing to come back and enter into discussion? And I'm not saying we change truth. We're still going to speak truth. But I think we've got to really be clear not to enter into that realm of mocking. I learned this the hard way years ago. I have a friend who got caught up in a homosexual affair. It cost him his marriage. There's a great story to it. I don't have time to go into all of it. There's a redemptive story to it. But one of the things that he taught me was how, when he was in the gay community and was living that lifestyle, how often the Adam and Steve jokes make gay people not even want to go to church or even interact with scriptural people. You're just making fun of me. You don't really care. And I hadn't thought about those things. Now, the redemptive story for him is, I think they were apart 5-6 years. They were remarried. They're still living happily out in the east side of the state, and they have a great marriage, and God did a wonderful, wonderful redemptive work for them. But it was because of him and what he was going through that I learned some things that I was kind of used to doing, kind of used to joking around with, that may not be all that helpful when we're talking.
With an individual like that, he was still a male. He wasn't.
Yeah, he was just in a homosexual relationship.
What we see a lot of today is they're male
Yeah.
you know, and they come out of that.
And,
They
and
make them physically look like a man, but all the other parts are still working.
sure.
They could become pregnant.
And that's the hard part is, from our perspective, when we step back, it does become almost comical. Why would you not see this here? I mean, come on. I mean, you can dress a certain way, you can have a certain thing, but you're not changing your DNA. You're not changing who you are. And so that debate and that discussion that's going on in their mind is very difficult for some of them. It's interesting, if you go back to the First Council of Nicaea, which some of you know some of the things that happened, that's AD 325, 326, 25. There were things that were put into the canons prohibiting voluntary, non-medically indicated castration. It was in the discussion back, you think this is something new. So remember, I say not things are all that new, but there were issues of people that were seeking castration for various reasons that were non-medical, but it was specifically talked about in the Council of Nicaea in AD 325.
Say that again real slow. So you're saying they're voluntarily...
They were
being
choosing to be castrated for non-medical indicated reasons, voluntary non-medical reasons.
And it's not like, you know, you're somebody's slave and he wants to make you a eunuch to, you know, watch his hair.
No, but that was also addressed in the council too, because that was also obviously spoken against. There were reasons that happened. We know that as far as cultural reasons back during those times. And it's interesting, you know, why do I bring that up? Because it's been discussed before, why we shouldn't do certain things. Another thing that's kind of important to think about is the phrase according to its kind or according to their kinds is used at least 10 times in Genesis chapter 1. There are separate species and genders which are distinct and different. So God clearly creates categories of creation. On top of that, the word separate is used 5 times in the first chapter. It talks about being set apart. It's a word of distinction and differentiation. So the creation account shows how God separated many things. He separated the light from the darkness. He separated the waters from the waters above, from the waters below, dry land from the waters, separated the day from the night, and he separated humankind into 2 biological sexes. It was part of his overall design in that creative work. If we go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, where God is creating order and design out of formlessness or emptiness or voidness, he creates distinct categories. Now, creation has become so fluid, it's lost its distinctiveness. Our culture has kind of slidden back into that void without form, and we're kind of gone way backwards in creative order. If you drop down to verse 28, God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply." We see that Adam and Eve were made to complement each other in an intimate relationship so that they would be able to have children. It's part of the blessing that was God given to them. He gave them different bodies, different anatomical structures, and in his sovereign, wise design, when Adam and Eve come together physically in their separate genders with their distinctive reproductive organs, they can produce the next generation, because that's the way God created it to be. That's the way he designed it to be. God's plan was for them to flourish and to be fruitful. And again, I emphasize that when God created humankind as male and female, he didn't just say it was good. He adds that idea that it was very good. It's exceedingly great. The word good is well-pleasing or satisfying. This idea, exceedingly Great. So if you follow this cycle through, human beings are made in the image of God. He made them male and female. He made them to procreate, and he called it all very good. It's a four-part structure that's pretty simple in some ways, but it is the bedrock to what we're talking about. Now, I'm going to pause here and kind of just take a few minutes and just let's talk about some terms because I think it's important. Gender. Gender has always been a synonym for one's biological sex. It's not anymore. You cannot use that as a synonym. It's been, if you will, hijacked, and it now often gets referred to as the gender spectrum. If you're going to talk about biological sex, you're not supposed to talk about gender. You're supposed to talk about biological sex. Seems like we're splitting hairs. It was interesting. I don't know who found this statistic. In 2014, Facebook provided 56 gender options. By 2018, 71 options were provided. Different gender options. And so if you don't identify with the pre-populated list of genders, you can add your own. They will let you do that. It'll commonly say, you'll hear somebody say that a doctor assigned them their gender at birth. That's a very common way that they talk about. Their gender was assigned to them by the doctor. That's not true. The doctor made an observation, and the observation became an identification. Gender dysphoria is a feeling, it's an emotional, psychological identity that does not match with one's biological sex. So these people will talk about they feel trapped in the wrong body. Gender dysphoria basically says, I may look like a male or a female on the outside, but everything on inside of me tells me that I'm a female. I have feelings like a female, I have desires like a female, all of those things, and therefore they'll say I'm trapped in the wrong body. And then they will add on to that, why would you be so cruel to want me to live my life trapped? Gender identity has really become who someone wants themselves to be. To be human is to be male or female. Your sex is your gender is your sex. It has nothing to do with what you might feel because it's written in your DNA and nearly every cell in your body screams it. But people want to talk about gender identity. So gender identity, gender expression is different than gender identity. Gender expression talks about how somebody presents themselves to others, how I demonstrate myself to you as either male, female, or a combination of the two, or neither. I'm neither male nor female, or I'm both male and female, or I'm male or female. It can include language, clothes, actions. The basic idea with gender expression is if I say it to you, that should settle the argument. Whatever I say to you about my expression, that should settle the argument. We don't need to talk about it anymore. Transgender is an umbrella term that includes everyone who feels a dissatisfaction with their biological sex, as well as those who would like to cross-dress. But transgender people do take offense sometimes being called cross-dressers. That's a term that many of us in this room are familiar with because of our age, but they don't like that because it's bigger to them. It's an expression of the feeling that their gender doesn't correspond to their assigned sex. Non-binary.
Wait,
Yep, go ahead.
Again, you said there's gender, there's like one is a presentation and one's the...
Gender identity is who I feel, or what my sense of being is. My expression is how I dress and how I act.
Identity doesn't equal
Not always.
expression. Okay.
Not always. Non-binary refers to somebody who does not identify as either male or female. Transsexuals are then people who are biologically normal and healthy men or women who live as members of the opposite sex. They may or may not have taken hormones or surgical treatment. Transgenders and transsexuals are not the same thing. One often involves hormones and surgeries and one does not. But it doesn't negate.
I'm trying to wrap my, so you're saying transsexuals are ones who have actually had an operation or whatever?
They may or may not, but they're completely living as the opposite sex. They fully embraced it.
Whereas transsexuals aren't necessarily.
Transgenders sometimes do or do not.
Okay.
And most of you in this room don't realize it yet, but you are cisgender. I gave you a new name for yourself tonight. Some of you are like, what on earth? You just gave me a new label for me? Well, it's a fairly recent term, actually, and it's the opposite of a transgender. So a cisgender person is either a man or a woman. Cis, C-I-S. C-I-S-G-E-N-D-E-R. Plenty of commentaries. I will not refer to myself as a cisgendered person. You want to know what I am? I'll tell you. I'm a man. That's the way it works. And you should have no problem not trying to, you do not have to embrace their labels for yourself. But you do need to be aware of the labels they use so you can talk with them. And it's complicated, y'all. This isn't some flip the switch and just sit down and have a conversation with people.
It's not an accommodation for them, it's just a recognition. You're not saying what they're doing is right, but you realize they believe what they're saying.
Yeah, at some level.
I couldn't accept what they
Yeah.
did.
The problem is, at the end of the day, one of the reasons they want you to embrace the labels that they choose is they want you to also embrace their decision. It's a full embracement of their lifestyle, not just embracing the ideology of it. And that's where it gets really, really...
See, and this is kind of where I have a little bit of a problem, because it's like if I said I'm a zebra, and you'd have to accommodate my thoughts. I mean, it would be
Yes,
like,
there are places that would be willing to do that for you, Tim.
you know, it would be like almost like agreeing with it in some
They would be
level.
happy to put hay outside for you and let you eat from a trough, and you can defecate in your yard at will. You don't have to wear any clothes. You just hang out back, and you're a zebra.
Well, I do that sometimes anyway.
Please don't say that.
I'm teasing.
I don't need that imagery in my head. Yes,
I
ma'am.
don't even want to think about it. But my point being that, like, you're sort of like playing along, and
It's a fine line between understanding what they mean when they use these words and agreeing with them. It's a really, really careful line.
yeah.
And I don't want to ever, you've heard me wrestle this morning, and I tried to get it right tonight, that the gal that we're going to have speak in a minute, I've referred to as a female. I've not talked about the fact that she is a transgendered person. I've referred to her as a female. I think that's important to not lose that, but we also still have to understand what they mean when they use these words. If you're going to interact with them, you got to know what they mean. Yes, ma'am.
What about the use of the pronouns that they want?
Yeah, that's another whole can of worms, isn't it?
I mean,
all
some
right.
of us are at work, and we got to deal with this kind of garb.
Why do you think we're talking about this?
Just from some experience that I've had at a couple of high schools, working with kids who struggle with this. I think we have to recognize that this is what's the word I'm looking for? A deep-seated insecurity.
Yeah.
And they do not know what, they, male or female, they do not know what they some of them are still figuring out their lives because they had some trauma
Yep.
in their childhood or in their teens that makes them extremely confused.
There are very tragic statistics from inside this community. Very, very tragic statistics.
I've had some experience with it myself. The easiest way to handle that situation that I've seen is to look at it like any other sin or sinner and treat it like Christ was treated, and see beyond the sin to the sinner to try to reach the person to Christ, to try to look past that. Whatever, you don't even want to buy into the sin.
Yeah.
You want to see through that to reach the person to Christ.
It's a very difficult decision. And those of you who work in a secular marketplace at any level, you could be faced with someone saying to you, "Hi, my name is," and I identify with she, her, or they pronouns, or all the, and there is a expectation then from them for you to use those pronouns.
Now, question, I understand a lot of these, if you have some person issue or something kind of life that's caused this way. But on the other hand, are we starting to see some who are taking advantage of this?
Oh, yeah.
There's a story about a YMCA where this man enters the ladies' locker room in the shower and dressing mirror, they've got little girls there, and there is nothing about him that says he's trans, nothing at all.
Yep.
He's just a typical man, and then
Because I don't have to have surgery for you to allow me to embrace an identity. And it is being taken advantage of. And I want to very gently say something, and this is just because when you face this in society, you have to understand something. Anybody that goes through the medical system, okay, they all receive a psychological diagnosis of gender dysphoria. It is not a new term. Gender dysphoria has been around for a long time. It is basically, I don't feel right in my body. I don't feel like a boy. I don't feel like a girl. It is a psychological thing that they're wrestling themselves through. I believe it is still, I probably should have looked, but it used to be a required diagnosis before you could seek transgender treatment. You had to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. And, you know, most times you're diagnosed with things, you know, you want to change or do whatever to get through it or get over it, figure out how to deal with it. But we're changing everything now. And interacting, let me do this. All right. Let me play this. Again, this gal, her whole thing is about Christians transgender. That's her whole platform. Okay, goes by the name of Austin Hartke. That's her name. But let me just listen to her for a minute. I think maybe. Dick, I don't know, did I turn the computer up? Is the computer volume up? Well, I might have to come back here anyway. Click on it.
Hello world, let's talk about being transgender and Christian. Is it even possible? Spoiler alert, yeah it is! Lots of wonderful people have talked about this before me. There are a lot of great resources out there, including queertheology.com, the Human Rights Campaign's Out in Scripture page, and an old webpage that is now archived called transchristians.org. There are also some great videos on YouTube, including Integra TV's documentary Voices of Witness Out of the Box, which tells stories of trans people and their faith. I'm sticking all these resources down in the description below in case you haven't seen them yet and want to check them out. I'm a transgender person in faith, and when I was first coming to grips with my gender identity and I started Googling transgender and Christian, I found a lot of stuff. Some of it great, like stuff I just mentioned. Some of it that was kind of just caustic and was hateful, and some of it downright ridiculous. There are a few people out there who believe that just by being transgender, just by being gender nonconforming, you are walking away from God, or even that your whole existence is some kind of abomination. I'm making this video because I want there to be more resources out there for people that are trying to bring their gender identity and their faith together. I want the voices of love to outnumber the voices of hate. So here we are. My name is Austin, and I have read the Bible cover to cover, and I have a master's degree in biblical studies, and I'm here to offer any information that I can. Each of the videos in the series we're starting now is going to cover one Bible verse or one concept that has to do with gender identity or has been used to condemn various gender identities in the past. We're going to dive into history, philosophy, obviously theology, and I'll tell you right now, I don't have all the answers, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be asking the questions. So let's give it a shot. Today we're starting at the very beginning, Genesis 1. Genesis is the first book of what we call the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, and it tells one of the stories at the beginning of the world. I know, right? One of the stories? Well, okay, we're going to get to the other story next week, so tune back in. Genesis chapter 1 is probably the origin story you're most familiar with if you grew up going to church. In it, God creates light and dark, sun and moon, sea and land, fish and birds, animals and planets, and at the end, God creates two humans and calls everything good. The issue that this chapter brings up has to do with the creation of male and female. Verse 27 is the key verse in this passage. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Some people take this to mean that your physical sex, your reproductive organs, your chromosomes, your hormones, they're actually part of God's image, and so they shouldn't be messed with. They might say that male and female are made in God's image, and so if you were born and the doctor took a look at your reproductive organs when you were a baby, you were born, and said, this person is male, then you shouldn't mess with that, and you'll always be male, because that's part of God's image in you. I and many others argue that physical sex can't possibly be what this verse is referring to, since God doesn't have a physical body. And you know what this actually means is that our spirits are created in God's image, because we are, after all, creative and loving, and we sacrifice for those we love and those that we don't love sometimes, and those are all integral parts of who God is. So maybe it's something other than our bodies. We'll never know, probably, what this verse actually meant, but there are lots of people that argue that this is not about your physical sex. Another thing to think about in Genesis 1 is the creation of dualities. God creates the land and the sea, the earth and the sky, all these things that are broken up into twos. But we all know that nature isn't that easily categorized. If day and night were so equally separated, we wouldn't have dawn or dusk. And what about coral? What about something that is neither a real animal nor a real plant? What about estuaries and swamps that are a meeting of land and sea, and they're sort of both? What about the poor platypus who baffled scientists so badly they had to give it its whole other category with the poor echidna? Nature isn't that easily categorized, and what the writer of Genesis 1 seems to be doing is using these dualities in a sort of poetic way to give things kind of a cadence as you read it, especially if you read it in the original language. But God created all the in-between spaces just as much as God created things on polar opposites. So we have to keep that in mind and realize that there is more than just one or the other. In fact, we might actually see Genesis 1 as an issue of lack of representation. One more thing to take into consideration is verse 28, which is God's first command to the humans. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. I, for one, have always been a little skittish about words like dominion and subdue, but we have to remember that this is a translation, so these words probably have more than one meaning, and these meanings we can't even translate into English. What I take from it, and what others have taken from it, is that this is God's command that gives humans more power in creation, that gives humans this sense of being co-creators in the world. The commentary on this verse in the New Interpreter's Bible says, the involvement in the creative process of those created in the divine image takes the form of a command. These first divine words to human beings are about their relationship, not with God, but with the earth. They constitute a sharing of the exercise of power or dominion. From the beginning, God chooses not to be the only one who has ever exercised creative power. The initiative has been solely God's, but once the invitation has been issued, God establishes a power-sharing relationship with the humans. And if we are supposed to act for good in our world, not on par with God, but as stewards of creation, then we are also empowered to act freely for good in the co-creation of our body as transgender people of faith. We might see ourselves and others as continuations of God's creation in the world, as people who can use the tools that God gives us to become more truly ourselves, more truly who God calls us to be. Tune in next week and subscribe for a chat about Genesis 2. I hope this has been helpful, and feel free to leave comments down below. Peace, everybody.
Okay. I don't want to say anything. I just want to hear. Jason, would you hit those lights for me, please? I don't know why it's not progressing on to the next thing, but now you have to sit there and look at whatever's in the rest of that feed. I just want to hear what you think. This is she says, I am a transgendered person of faith, calls herself a Christian, and then she does this explanation. So, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I heard the argument about, God's spirit, and so you can't have male and female, right? Because it's God's spirit. But like male and female is well understood and has been understood for about 6,000 years. And to procreate, you need a male and a female, and that's all there is to it. I mean, there's no other way to have sexual reproduction.
Okay? I'm just going to listen to your interactions right now. I'm just going to sit here and let you interact.
To me, it seems like a little bit of a surprise that it took all the way till 2021 or 2024 before we figured out that what we thought for all these thousands of years really wasn't correct. We're part of the creative process. We were nothing. We didn't exist. God thought this up on his own without our participation, yet now we're part of the creative process. Why didn't we see this, 60 centuries ago?
Sure. Right.
And
Usually feel that at one time they don't get God into their box and now it's pretty much something else.
Sure. Karen?
not taking the Bible at its word. Saying, oh, we're never going to understand this word dominion. I mean, what, it's going to suddenly become equality? It's going to change that much?
Sure.
It's,
Tony?
He's twisting the Bible to make himself feel better.
Okay.
In other words, the Bible doesn't mean anything, really, other than the fact that I'm right.
Okay, Ken?
I see him, him,
It's a her.
trying to put herself on the same level as God. It'll never happen. We are created. God created us. We don't create a thing. So how you could say that you could change creation, that's just a hang up on that.
Anybody else want it? Mara and then Amanda.
But can you have a facelift if
Some people should.
We-
First of all, when we started having to deal with all this, it's more apparent now. The first thing your mind goes to is Sodom and Gomorrah. So we have that in our mind biblically, and, so now though, but you know what, now we have to learn too, that God created everyone, but that person is not being led by God, and we need to pray for her because she is so actually believing what she's saying. It's not like she just has something to say. She's actually believing it because Satan really put it in her mind. And now listen, our young people, listen to this.
Yep.
And in their mind.
Do you know how long it took me to find her? Not long at all.
But they're going to listen to this, and they're all struggling right now. Even our Christian kids are struggling right now with, well, who am I supposed to be to live with her? But you get this into their minds, okay, and we've got to watch. We've got to just keep praying and watch our kids.
Luther Rice, which is not a bad seminary. It's now part of Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary.
My question to her is if she really truly is a Christian, could we
I didn't hear her testimony, to be honest, to be fair to her. I did not hear her testimony of that part. But I will say that with the limited interaction I've had, you'll hear a lot of them say, I prayed for years for God to take this away from me because I thought that's what needed to happen, and he didn't. So I might venture to say, let me focus on the family made a statement here. Sorry, I'm cutting some of you off. Yep, Steve.
I'm sorry. I thought the strongest part of her argument was where she said there's other binaries described in Genesis chapter 1.
The dualities, yeah.
Dualities that are not binaries. Like it talks about separating the light from the day, but yet we have dusk.
Yeah, it's
I thought that was a strong argument that she made, actually.
One of the things you have to understand when you're
And
dealing...
it would be easier. I would have liked Genesis, and God made them male and female, therefore you shall not transition between male and female. that would be great if it would have said that, but it doesn't. And I don't, as a Christian, I don't want to read into the Bible and make it say, I don't want to take my assumption
Sure.
either and make it say something because of my disposition.
Right.
That's exactly what she's going with.
Well, we got to make sure we don't swing the pendulum.
Well, the other thing I wanted you to hear her because, if I could say this just kindly, she's not stupid, y'all. I mean, she's a very smart young woman.
eloquent.
Deceived or whatever she is, whatever you want to call it, she is a very smart woman. Karen, then Amanda.
So what she's saying, though, with that duality thing, is she is making an argument for doctrine from silence, which
Yeah.
is extremely dangerous.
Yep. Anytime that happens.
What I was going to ask you is, most of these transgenders or so forth, do they actually end up in homosexual relations after that? Is absolutely fine.
They would not consider the relationships they end up in as same-sex relationships.
They don't recognize it as that, but the reality is,
Biologically, it can become that way. One of the things that, and I don't want to get overly graphic or anything, but understand that people who go through transgender surgeries, they are not fully functional with these new body parts, okay? They do not have a fully functioning vagina. They do not have a fully functioning penis. They cannot procreate. They cannot, just because you take the man's organs and put them up internally doesn't suddenly create ovaries and all of this stuff.
When the mind and the body is not in sync, why is it that we have to change the body? Why don't they work on the mind? The mind is it's an abstract and thinks, in changing ways, from second to second. But the body is it's a physical thing. It's proven what
Sure.
gender is right there. So why do we change the body?
The other thing that's coming out with that is we're seeing more stories of detransitioning, okay? So this is when a person has had some kind of corrective surgery or they've transitioned into another gender identity, and then at some point in their story, they go, what did I do? I didn't want to do this. And it's a rather permanent surgical change. I was listening to a gal's story the other day, and she had transitioned to a male lifestyle and has transitioned back to a female lifestyle. She didn't have bottom surgery, so she was able to conceive. But one of the things she was crying when I was listening to her story is, I'll never be able to breastfeed my child. Never be able to do that.
I find it interesting that lately there's always talk about treating mental health, making that everybody aware of it and how badly it's out there and treatment. And yet this is one area they don't lump into that as mental health.
Well, they still say it's a mental health issue, but they say to cure the mental health issue, this is the solution. Let me read to you a statement that came from Focus on the Family about how do we interact with some of these things.
Every human possesses inherent dignity and immeasurable worth. Christians are called to defend and protect the marginalized and suffering among us. There should be no place for shame or degradation. Biblical humility also guides us. Sin is pervasive and impacts each of us. There is no room for pride or judgment. Temptations are common to us all. And then there's a list of things to do. 1, pray. Ultimately, this is not even a mental health issue. It is a spiritual issue. 2, vote biblical values. There is no, in my opinion, biblically, there's no excuse for a Bible-believing Christian to not participate in the political process that's been afforded to us. And, we just had elections, what was that, Tuesday, right? That's last week. And I know, I'll be honest with you. I was bound a little bit of a head cold, and I was going, well, we already know who the candidates are. We have already done this. I had every excuse not to get my tail out of bed and go drive my whole mile down the road here, to the poll, But it was something within me. It's a conviction within me that I think Paul lines out in Romans about our participation in our government system. 3, teach your children and grandchildren God's perfect design. That God created them in his image. He created men and women differently by design. Those 2 books that we put in the library, Why God Made Me a Boy, Why God Made Me a Girl. Great resource. Ask God to give you genuine love alongside your righteous anger. I think there is a righteous anger here, okay? There's a righteous thing that wells up within you. This is not right, it is wrong. But ask God to make sure that alongside that there is a love that goes along. Number 5, protect vulnerable children. Monitor what your kids see on your phones. Monitor what your grandkids are looking at. We put cell phones in kids' hands before they even know how to talk. And that's your conviction. You do what you have to do. But do you realize how easy it is to get brainwashed by giving child access to the internet with these ideologies? Our stuff is not the first thing that comes up in the algorithm. It's the world's ideologies. So,
I see what you're saying. Yeah, Google search doesn't bring up Jesus Christ.
No. Interesting. The American College of Pediatricians says, quote, conditioning children into believing a lifetime of chemical and surgical impersonation of the opposite sex is normal and healthful. To do that, it's child abuse. That's what the American College of Pediatricians says. But at the same time, we have laws that require pediatricians to perform and to prescribe. According to the DSM, Diagnostics and Statistics Manual, we're on DSM-5, DSM-6 should be out any time. As the American Psychiatric Association, we use it for all kinds of things. As many as 98% of gender-confused boys and 88% of gender-confused girls eventually will accept their biological sex after naturally passing through puberty. 98% of boys, 88% of girls will just naturally, once they get through puberty, again, Karen brought up a very valid point. Things that happen prepubescent and pubescent-wise, when you're going through those teenage years and you're figuring out what all of this is that you're now being equipped with, and it should be celebrated by God's design, but it's confusing. I know it's been a while for all of us, but come on, if you go back, it was kind of weird. And it's in the middle of all that weirdness, I think we need to advocate to not let children make lifelong altering decisions based on what they're feeling at that age point. I just think you have to be careful.
And like you said, it's not celebrated anymore. No. And it should be celebrated that you're becoming a young woman, becoming a young man.
we worked as hard as we could at that. And, you know, there's just me and my brother, so I didn't know a whole lot about girls as far as that goes. But I mean, my wife, I mean, kudos to her as far as helping our girls celebrate their menstrual cycle. It wasn't like, oh no, here it comes. I mean, she just helped them to celebrate it. That it was something that God, you know, part of what he had designed for them to be able to have children, and how this, I mean, it was, and we don't do that enough. Another thing is, do speak up. Be informed of what's going on in our school systems. Be present when you can. Unfortunately, those who are promoting gender theory will present parents as unsafe and bigoted, transphobic, if you don't go along with them. But biblically, above all else, but also other things, parents are responsible for their children, and a parent has a right and should question what their child might be exposed to. And we need to be involved in that.
Yep.
Be prepared for pushback. Be prepared to be called a bigot. Be prepared to be called homophobic or what's the other one? I'm trying to think. Transphobic. There's the other one. It's going to happen. But be hopeful, because God can redeem and restore anyone through a relationship with Jesus Christ. And we're seeing that. We're seeing stories where people have been loved by the church who have come out of these trans lifestyles.
We have to believe that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Believe that he can do that.
John Stonestreet, who is with the Colson Center, Chuck Colson's Breakpoint, is that right? Is that Breakpoint? He writes, with a 900% increase in young people claiming gender dysphoria, love must speak the truth. As gentle as we must with those who struggle with whom God created them to be, the church has to stand up for what is true about humanity, including God's good creation of the human body and the inherent value of each person since they bear his image. A 900% increase in gender dysphoria diagnosis in recent years. Staggering. I guess I wanted to spend a little bit of time. I'm not, you say, are you going to play more of her videos? No, I'm not. I wanted you to just get an idea of how they think, how they process things, what they're trying to figure out in the story. About 2 videos from now, she has a much lower voice. I mean, she's in process. So, but I also, for those of you who really like to do deep dives, and I mean, you got to like a deep dive. This is an incredibly good book. It's called Searching for Adam by Terry Mortensen. It's Genesis and Truth about man's origin. It's about 500 pages, and it's scientific, but it's good stuff. If you want a deep dive, there's some really, really good stuff in this book. Before we leave tonight, I don't want you to go out of here going, well, Pastor said we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that. I'm not really trying to say what you should and shouldn't do at some level. I'm just asking all of us to be prepared to interact with these people who we don't understand and they don't understand us. We're on different pages. We're on different books. I mean, we're just in 2 different worlds. And so we have to figure out what's part of their story, what's going on in their world, how did they get there, who they've been listening to, being familiar with understanding, Thankfully, we don't have just Genesis 1:26 and 27 regarding male and female. There's all Genesis chapter 2, which expounds on it in much more detail. And she does have a video on Genesis chapter 2. But anyway, my point is,
Evolution is about creating an atheistic culture, true. But this whole idea of gender identity, gender conformity or nonconformity is ultimately, in my opinion, and I think it's a biblical opinion, it is a clear attack on the very image of God himself. It's an attack against the image of God itself. And that should be a big deal for us. That should be important for us. I realize that most of us in this room are either close to or in the grandparenting phase. Not everybody, Joseph. You better not have grandkids yet. That would be a problem. Kathy's not a grandparent. She's in the middle of parenting throes. It's part of the reason some of us, this is before all this was going on, we made the choice to homeschool. But if your kids are involved, and my grandkids are in public school, some of them. And I tell my son all the time, I pray for you because I know you have to debrief them every time they come home. You have to spend time making sure you understand what they're hearing, what they're learning, and how to interact with that.
I'm just going to comment. The other day we were watching what was it on the History Channel? We were watching about the flood. Just the other night, it was a reporting on the History Channel. Anyway, I can't remember the name of the program. Anyway, they were talking about different flood stories around the world, and the upshot at the end of the program was that where the Bible got its flood story was actually from India or from wherever. And you hear this, you start to get a little bit of angst. But then you have to remember, God isn't threatened by that. It's not threatening.
Nope.
He knows exactly what people are saying. So with this issue too, as confused as people are, and they would even be insulted for what I said. I don't mean to insult them that way. But he understands. There's no affront to, it's an affront to God, but he's not threatened by it. He doesn't have any angst about it, so to speak.
Correct.
He has it.
And little comments mean a lot. Did you notice that she said this is one of the creation narratives? Did you catch her throw that out there just in passing? Because there are other extra biblical creation narratives. But Ken?
See, I thought they were referring to the Genesis 1, Genesis 2.
Just because I know a little bit more about her. No, she's not.
I just think what Joseph makes me think of where we are at as mankind in the position of eternity, the second coming, all of these things come to mind. And if you think about Noah and the flood, and what happened, there was no, 8 people out of the whole world were found to be righteous. The rest were not. They were without God. And as you look at our society today and how we're moving, it's fast moving in that direction where people are denying God and his power, his preeminence.
I forget exactly when we crossed the threshold. It was within the last couple of years we crossed the threshold where less than 50% even want to consider themselves Christian, whether they're Christian or not. And used to everybody, we crossed that threshold a couple of years ago. It's like 46% and less.
Even out of that, the majority of that would not be Christian.
Would not be biblical Christianity. I think, there's to encourage you, as it was in the days of Noah, it's going to be, and we're seeing it. These are the last days. Men are, if you will, let me just take it off of man. Satan is having a heyday. And that's what's going on. He is deceiving, and suicide rates, abortion rates. Just go through the destruction of life, the destruction of life, the destruction of life. But in the end, God wins.
Look only at these transgenders, whatever, that claim to actually be Christian, who have, how you said, have prayed to take, what is the answer, the solution to this, if they really are Christian?
Well, that's one of the first things I want to hear is what do they mean by a Christian? I want to try to understand what that means to them.
So just from her theology in the video, I mean, it sounds very liberal. Very much not, like you said, not taking God at his word, not taking the Bible literally. But also, she outright took the creation of a human being out of God's hands in a way.
Sure.
By saying that the parents are now co-creators.
God created a duplicity, and now we can create everything in between.
Right, so it's the parents' fault what the gender was that the baby was, not that God created you to be a man or me to be a woman, right? But
They will sometimes take it out of the parents, and they'll say the doctor. It's the doctor's problem. It's a medical problem. Doctors need to quit saying, you have a boy, you have a girl. So it's not your parents' fault anymore. It's the doctor's fault.
so it's
Mara.
I think, I'm not trying to make this sound simple, but I think what we need to realize and think about is that the unsaved are going to live as the unsaved. And we get so surprised at everything that goes on, but we have to, we get mad at people now, but they're unsaved. They don't have the Holy Spirit in them to go.
That's true.
So we need to, again, and prayer is everything.
Yep.
Prayer is everything, because we can't really, there's a lot of things we just can't do, but we can pray.
I would put with that, pray and be prepared biblically. Be prepared to be able to interact on these. Some of you may never have to interact with it. I have family members who are a part of this world, so I interact with it, okay? And it's not always easy, and I don't always say the right things, and I'm always saying, I didn't mean to say that, I didn't mean to come across that way, but help me here. And it's just the way we have to do it. Let me pray for you guys. God, thanks so much for tonight. Thank you. Thank you for the Spirit of God that indwells us, that just helps us to understand that your word is truth. Your word is your revealed truth. You have preserved the word of God in the words of man for us so that we can understand your heart on these issues and so many more. Culture will change. People's ideas will change. People's emotions and feelings and struggles will change. But you don't. And we're grateful for having a place we can anchor to. God, give us a deep-seated love for the lost, those in this lifestyle and any other label we want to put on it. Help us to, even if we don't meet people who are in this lifestyle, to be praying for those that are. Help us to think about the person we're talking with at the grocery store or on the line at work or at the restaurant. These people that we're meeting are going to spend eternity somewhere. And help us to ask ourselves if we care and figure out how we can interact with this world that we live in. It's crazy out there, God, and you know it. But it's part of what happens when you are pushed out. Mankind is capable of absolutely anything when you are pushed out of the picture, when you are doubted, when you are questioned, when you are redefined. Again, as your child, I am just so grateful to have your word, to give me a place to anchor to, facts to hold on to. And then, Father, help us to, as we deal with these topics and others that really get under our skin, to balance our righteous indignation with genuine biblical love. Help us as we continue to interact with folks, whether in this cycle or in others. Help us as we continue to pursue our understanding of the creation narrative and how it's going to fall apart very quickly because man seeks his own way. So thankful that you interrupted my seeking my own way. And Jesus came to seek and save me who was lost. That I'm your child. I've been saved and changed. And prayerfully being changed moment by moment, day by day. So grateful for what you've done in my life. And God, I pray that you would help me to be eager to share that with others this week. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Have a good week, everybody. Searching for Adam. It's about basically, let me turn this mic off.